If we want to round decimals and other numbers, for instance, if we round off 56.1637 to the nearest tenth, that means we're rounding off to the first decimal place after the decimal point, and the number would round off to 56.2, because the 6 in the hundreds position will round up to a 2 in the tenths position. Rounding off to the nearest 100th, we now only want 2 decimal places after the decimal point. The 3 in the hundredths position will mean that the decimal will stay as 56.16. And rounding off to the nearest 1,000th, then we need to look at the 10,000ths position. You can see that's going to round up the 1,000th into a 4, so it will become 56.164. When we want to round off ordinary numbers, we do so that we can make estimates of operations that would otherwise take time to do with pencil and paper. Now, the estimates are done in our head. I don't want to see any evidence of working on pencil and paper, as we have done on these previous pages, if you are asked to make a quick estimate. So, for instance, if we have 9.67 multiplied by 4.213, you do know the process of working that out by hand. However, if you want a quick estimate of the answer, you would round off both numbers to numbers that you can then operate on in your head. So, for instance, rounding off 9.67 to 10 and 4.213 to either a 4 or a 5. I think I've rounded it off to a 5 in the solutions. So you can do that operation very quickly in your head. The answer is 50. It's an estimate of the answer, it's not the exact answer. For the next problem, we've got numbers that we can easily round off to the nearest 10. So, say 46.893 becomes a 50, plus 13.763, let's round that off to 10, and the 17.097 rounded off to 20. You've now got 60 over 20. That you can do very quickly in your head. The answer is 3. Notice this, in this second one, we actually rounded off all the numbers to the nearest 10. When we look at the next problem, we can't really round off to the same place value. For instance, the first number is in the thousands, and a couple of the numbers are tens, and then we've got a unit. So we're going to have to round the first number off to, say, 8,000, so to the nearest 1,000. The next number we will probably round off to, well, you could round it off to 30, but I'd probably round it off to 40 because I know that 4 divides into 8 quite nicely. 1.113, that's not really going to be very relevant. Let's round that off to 0, because the next number we can round up to, or down to, 40. So now make sure you account for your order of operations. So we need to do the division first. Dividing through by 10 is easy. 4 divided into 800 is 200, plus 40, and your answer is 240. So very quick to do in your head. You don't need to do any big calculations on paper, and that's the point of an estimate. So now that we've finished with doing operations on decimal numbers, Then rounding those decimal numbers, we're going to move on to doing some more preliminary work with fractions, and we're going to make equivalent fractions but also simplify fractions. So for instance, if I have a fraction of 1/2 and I want to make it an equivalent fraction out of 4, what have I done to 2 to turn it into a 4? I've had to multiply it by 2. If I multiply the denominator by 2, I must also multiply the numerator by 2. So now I can say 2 times 2 is 4, 1 times 2 is 2. The equivalent fraction is 2 over 4. To turn 1/2 into an equivalent fraction out of 24, what do I need to do to 2 to turn it into 24? I need to multiply it by 12. So top and bottom, numerator and denominator multiplied by 12. 2 times 12 is 24. 1 times 12 is 12. Turning 1/2 into an equivalent fraction out of 78, what do you do to 2 to turn it into 78? Well, you've got to multiply it by something to determine what that is. Divide 2 into 78 and it's 39. So 2 multiplied by 39 will give 78. Multiplying numerator and denominator by 39. 2 times 39 is 78. 1 times 39 is 39. So the equivalent fraction is 39 out of 78. Making 1/2 an equivalent fraction out of 100, well, I think you're probably getting the hang of it now. It's 50 over 100. To make 2/5 an equivalent fraction out of 20, what do you need to do to 5 to turn it into 20? You have to multiply it by 4. So multiply the numerator by 4 as well. 5 times 4 is 20. 2 times 4 is 8. So the equivalent fraction to 2/5 is 8/20. The next one, 4/7, we want to make it an equivalent fraction out of 35. What do you do to 7 to turn it into 35? You multiply it by 5. So multiply numerator and denominator by 5. 5 times 7 is 35. 4 times 5 is 20. So our equivalent fraction is 20 out of 35. When we simplify fractions, we divide the numerator and denominator by a common factor of both numbers. So if we look at 24 over 108, we want to simplify that. Those numbers are a little too big. Look for common factors. You can start with the simplest ones. So for instance, 2 divides into 24 and 108. So we get 12 out of 54. If we divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2, you should also see that 2 is a common factor of both 12 and 54. It becomes 6 over 27. But 2 is no longer a common factor of 6 and 27, so we look for other numbers that may be common factors of both. And the number is 3. 3 divides into 6 twice. 3 divides into 27 9 times. So 24 out of 108 simplifies to 2/9. 36 out of 108. Well, 36 will be divided by 2 to give 18. And 108 is divided by 2 to give 54. 2 is a common factor again, so 9 out of 27. And you should see that 3 is a common factor of 9 and 27. So we've got 3 ninths. And then 3 is a common factor again. So it simplifies quite a long way down to 1/3. 270 divided by 360. You should see that 10 is a common factor for both those numbers. So we can get rid of the 2 zeros. We've got 27 over 36. You can do this one very quickly if you realise, or do it very quickly in one step, if you realise that 9 is a factor of 27 and 36. 9 divides into 27 3 times. 9 divides into 36 4 times. And the last one, 42 out of 70. We want to simplify that. Can do that in 2 steps. Let's start with 2. 2 is a common factor of both those numbers. Dividing both by 2, we'll get 21 out of 35. You might now be able to see that both 21 and 35 have a common factor of 7. 7 divides into 21 3 times, and into 35 5 times. So we've simplified 42 out of 70 to 3/5.